Lynn Thigpen is an emeritus missionary with the International Mission Board, having ministered over 25 years in Southeast Asia, in Singapore, and Cambodia. She is a passionate advocate for adults with limited formal education, or oral and connected learners. She is an adjunct professor at Liberty University and the director of the Wisdom Project, which plans to offer coursework in orality on a global scale through Gateway Seminary's advanced program. As you have questions, please put them in the chat. And thank you, Lynn.
Thank you. Thank you. You're all here at the last session of the day, except for Dr. Stephan has a little part at the end. So mine is going to probably be one of the shortest sessions you've been in, so that there'll be time for that. My Prezi is shorter than yesterday. And if you didn't listen yesterday to my presentation, you might get a little confused. So if you get a chance to go back and listen to that, it will help, because this session builds on the session from yesterday. Thanks for listening. I appreciate it. And like many of you in this chat room or who have spoken, I studied under Dr. Stephan, and so he's looking at me and I'm like, I have to acknowledge my professor there who's had such an influence on me. In fact, what we're going to talk about today is the intersection of orality and animism, because we don't just teach non-readers, we teach them in their worldview. And so we want to look at what's that foundational worldview, and that's what my Prezi is going to be about. If you want to hear more about that second part, the animistic part, you can go to the Honor Shame website, and you can look for the Patronage Symposium, and there will be a audio. They have all the audio from the Patronage Symposium, and you can listen to more of that concept. That will help you a bit. And tell it to play. Hello, I'm Lynn Thigpen, and I'm talking about what's patronage got to do with it. Beyond storying and oral learning, we'll be looking at the intersection of where orality and animism meet, and how to do instruction, training in that intersection. What are the needs? So in order to do that, we're going to need a model. We need a framework. So we're going to use Franken's model, his framework. He's an educational philosopher. And he said, first thing we need to do is look at the telos, to look at the ends. Next, we need to look at the context or the situation. C, look at the excellencies or the outcomes. D, how to get to those outcomes. And E, the conclusions of what to do, when, and how. We're going to consolidate these into three things today to look at the telos, the situation, and the solution for these oral learners. First of all, we want to consider, what's our business? Each institution needs to see itself as if for the first time, Keller says, and ask the question, what business are we really in? So as missionaries and missiologists, we need to ask that question before we teach oral learners, what business are we in? What's our telos? So let's take a look at the telos. Now, in this really brief look at a telos, I don't have time today to just cover it all, but if we just consider four things today. If we look at the Old Testament, God said in 2 Chronicles 16:9, the eyes of Yahweh roam through the whole earth to show himself strong. For who? For those whose hearts are completely his. And Jesus said in Matthew 28, he said, make disciples of all nations and do what? Teach them to obey, teach them to observe everything I've commanded. Dallas Willard, an expert in spiritual formation, talked about the abundance of life realized through apprenticeship to Jesus naturally leads to what? To obedience. And then Bonhoeffer said when Jesus called men to follow him, he was summoning them to a visible act of obedience, and that was in baptism. So we might be right in saying, if we look at all of Scripture and the experts, that a good thing to urge our oral learners who have been animists, who were animists toward, is spiritual monogamy. Is being exclusively devoted to Christ, to obeying him, to being loyal and faithful to him alone, would be a worthy telos. And if we look at the situation, in my situation in Cambodia, we had a situation not just of orality, but also of folk religion, of animism, folk Buddhism. So where that intersection comes out, where those two meet, is what we need to consider. Now, when I studied my oral learners, my friends who were close to me, I found that most of them were adults with limited formal education. That's what I called them. I felt that was less derogatory than some other illiterate terms like illiterate, those kinds of things. ALFI, adults with limited formal education. We had war. We had so many things going on in Cambodia that limited people's opportunities for education. And as I studied how they learned, I learned, and if you'll listen to my other talk and read my other chapter, you'll see that I learned that they preferred to learn not by print, but through people. The dichotomy, and it was not a simple dichotomy, excuse me, was not orality versus literacy, but people versus print. So I called them connected learners. That's the way they preferred to learn, through relationship, observation, through connection. And we'll get into that more next, later. Also, they were animists. They were folk Buddhists. They were not, most knew nothing about Buddhism. They hadn't been taught in that religion, but they knew about the spirit world. So this venture started when one of my friends showed me his Krugumnayat, his guardian spirit that inhabited this object of string and paper, and asked, should I get rid of this to follow Jesus? And what I thought was just something you could simply throw in the trash, I did ethnographic research and discovered, excuse me, that really there was a connection there. There was a relationship with an entity, a spiritual entity, a guardian spirit. And what I was asking him to do was give up a relationship that was very important to him, and his family had protected him through years of war. And if I made a diagram out of it, I came to understand that the people who had a Krugumnayat in Cambodia knew the benefits and they knew the obligations. And when I explored the benefits and the obligations, I discovered, hey, this is just a form of patronage. Only the entity with whom they have the relationship is not seen, is spiritual, is a spirit being. And if we diagram that out like this, the foundation, and the situation with oral learners or connected learners in Cambodia was their foundation was social patronage. It was everywhere. They had pillars that upheld their worldview, their life, of spiritual patronage that was very important to them. They were not just those connected clients, connected learners on the top who learned by people. Their whole worldview, foundational issues were based on patronage. So their social identity was being oral learners, but their worldview deep underneath had to do with spiritual patronage. So I want to call the people that are connected learners, oral learners, who espouse folk animism, Buddhism, I want to call them connected clients. And the telos here, we're going to urge them toward, is spiritual monogamy, is leaving behind those spiritual entities and having a different kind of relationship, different kind of patronage relationship with the God of the universe. So that's our situation there. And how are we going to have a solution to their teaching needs? They're going to need a whole new world. We have a song like that. And they need a whole renovation of their world. When you think of discipleship with connected clients and their learning needs, how did they learn their first religion? They watched people. They didn't have a book. They didn't learn their religion in that way. They learned it through socialization, through watching grandma and grandpa, their parents. So how do they need to learn how to be Christians in a way that we don't normally use? And that is socialization. We need to build a whole new world. That entails a lot of observation, a lot of mentoring, a lot of things more like apprenticeship, observable kinds of spiritual disciplines. And what Schulman calls signature pedagogies have been in play.
By and large, missiologists, missionaries, don't learn those sorts of things in school. We learn certain other pedagogies. Foster, who studied after Schulman, found there were pedagogies of information, contextualization, transformation, and formation. Well, by and large, in seminary, we get a lot of information. But connected clients, what can you suppose that they might need here in this situation? They are going to need pedagogies of transformation and formation. Those look completely different than giving someone a book or fill in the blanks or those kinds of things. Now, they also learned that there were different pedagogies as they studied seminaries in general and that kind of teaching. Pedagogies of interpretation, interpreting as appropriating tradition, interpreting as continuous dialogue, interpreting by choosing right methods. And we tend to learn right methods for Bible study, whereas our oral learners might prefer the others, tradition, dialogue. In fact, I love this quote that hermeneutics begins, what we learn to do in seminary, hermeneutics begins where dialogue ends. And that's precisely what what connected clients need is dialogue. They need so many different things than we learn how to do in seminary. So what does discipleship need to look like? I think of Bonhoeffer, who had a seminary where they lived together. He called it, and I don't speak German, Finkenwalde, I would think. And he felt like he needed to model preaching, prayer, all these things in the community with the seminarians who were there. That would be something connected clients could learn from. They need to have the community around them. They need to visually see how to live out the Christian faith. Smith talks about having rituals and liturgies, habits. And we don't think about that when we want to teach oral learners. We don't think about, I saw so many people in Cambodia doing inductive Bible study, discovery Bible study, great things. But those are not the ways that connected clients prefer to learn. They've got to have that relationship. The good client would be the one who is learning spiritual monogamy, learning loyalty to the Lord, learning from testimonies, learning from so many other different signature pedagogies. We need to develop different signature pedagogies that go with connected clients. And I cannot cover all of those in this short talk. You'll have to look at the paper for that. And one of the things that I do is I teach orality at Liberty University. I'm an emeritus missionary with the International Mission Board, and I'm also director of the Wisdom Project. And next year, we're going to start offering a certificate in orality studies through the Gateway Seminary's advanced program. That is something we're going to offer worldwide online so that people can begin to learn more about orality, storying, looking at worldview and the intersection of worldview and orality. What do connected clients need? And going beyond storying to how do we teach the whole of the word and how do we have appropriate learning strategies for them. This short talk cannot possibly answer all this. You'll have to read the paper to see the signature pedagogies that I offer for doing this. But I direct you to that, and I thank you for listening today. God bless you, and have a great day.
So yesterday, people were asking about ways to do connected learning, other ways. And so yesterday, I just made this PDF, just some ideas of what does it look like if we're going to go beyond storying. Well, I do include storying on there, as you can tell. Other ideas of to use to teach the Bible to people who don't prefer to read, and beyond storying. So you can see there, you might not be able to read it all, and I can send it to you. You've got apprenticeships and mentoring and coaching and experiential learning and observational learning and service learning, and you've got liturgies and rituals and traditioning, and that's a term that I'll have in my paper. Spiritual disciplines that are in community that people can see, concrete learning, problem-based learning, And then I do list the story, song, drama, proverbs, ceremonies, metaphors, symbols, memes, dance, art, play, events. I mean, there's all these ideas here. Discourse, of course, embodied pedagogies, formative, transformative, and teaching others so that they can teach others with the intent to do that. Social learning, and the learning has to be relevant. You can have memorizing in community, communal reading with dialogue like Ezra and Nehemiah, media, audio, and you got to have some video recordings easily accessible to people. There's a whole article on mystagogical catechism I list in my paper. It was very interesting. And catechism, I love this last thing that Augustine, of course, he had oral learners in his day, people who didn't prefer to read. And he said, we are your books. So we need people that will not just read, but be a book, just living embodiment of the scriptures that people can see for oral learners.